Good evening, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and this is the Muddy Waters Podcast. And I am your host. I already said my name, so I won't go there. And the Muddy Waters Podcast exists to inform the people of Maine, help with things like the Maine Wire, informing the people of Maine what's actually going on in Maine politics. Unfortunately, mainstream media and that world has not done us any favors, especially here in Maine with local newspapers and in the television stations. And I talk with people on a regular basis about the fact that most people don't actually know what's going on in Maine politics because all of the news sources funnel you toward the national. They don't want you to know what's going on locally, because if you know what's going on locally, you can do something about it. It's actually the closest government is to you, the most influence you have over it. And I remember when I was going door to door 2 years ago, I talked to a guy and he's like, I only vote in presidential elections because that's when my vote counts the most. And it's actually the exact opposite. And so we try to inform you on what's going on by bringing in people who are involved in Maine politics or business owners or involved in industry or health to talk about like what's actually happening here in the state of Maine. And I do that by, whoa, there went my guest. I think he'll be back in just a moment. Technology issues. But anyway, so we have with us, as soon as his technology fixes itself, the gubernatorial candidate for 2026, Robert Wessels, running as a Republican. And I remember I first met you, Robert, when you visited the Cumberland County Republican Committee, I believe in like spring or maybe summer, but it was pretty early in 2023, announcing that you were running for governor. So thank you for being with us. How are you doing tonight?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And hopefully we can get through the technology issues, right? Isn't technology amazing?
It is when it works. Obviously, without technology, it would be really difficult to do this podcast because you live in Oxford, is it? Or
South Paris, yeah.
South
Neighbor
Paris,
to Oxford, Oxford Hills.
yeah, Oxford County, though, right?
Oxford County, yep.
Yeah. So South Paris, which is a little ways away from Westbrook, and with your work schedule, I imagine it would be difficult to have made it down. So technology does give us some opportunities, but it also presents some additional challenges. So again, thanks for being on, and thanks for making the decision to try and represent the people of Maine. It's really difficult to even run for office, let alone be an elected official. And so I thank you for desiring to step up and help make turn Maine into a better place to live.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? That's what we need.
That is the goal, and we do need that. So before we get into it, there's tons of stuff that I think we could talk about, especially with what's going on in the state of Maine. I think there are like three different news headlines that I want to get into from all from the Maine Wire, that'll touch on what's going on here in the state of Maine, like Maine's AG joining to defend gender affirming care, as they call it, for children. The decision by Maine to continue to allow boys to compete in women's sports. And then Jared Golden's frustration over his party. Those are all things that I think we'll want to touch on tonight. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself and what possessed you to decide to run for governor. And to start more than 3 years before the election.
Yeah. So I guess where to start? I guess I will start with tell you about myself. So I'm married, and we've been married 24 years in June. So I don't know how that is when I'm only 27. No. 24 years in June, and I am a father of three amazing teens / young adults. 16, 18, and 20. Honestly, I absolutely love them, and they and any future grandkids, I'm not rushing things here, are ultimately why I'm running. I'm looking and saying, what we are handing over to our kids at this point in our state is not right, and we need to do something about it, and we need to make it a better state and a better place for us, but for future generations as well. I think it's relevant. I'm a runner. It took me a long time to decide I could say that, but Uh, Ultimately, over um, I don't know, it was probably 10 years ago, 10 plus years ago, I decided I was overweight and wanted to do something about it. Started getting physically active, and as I was sitting at the finish line with my wife was running her first 5K, I was sitting at the finish line cheering her on with my Mountain Dew, and said, "I'm like, she did amazing," and I decided I should start running. So I invited her to join me for a half marathon, and we did that. We did the Auburn half marathon that fall. I once she said yes, I was like, oh crap, I guess I should start running. So I started running, and I about died on the first mile. Um, the next year we did a full marathon, and then I had a goal of doing getting 4 hour a 4 hour marathon. That was my goal, is under 4. And my first one was like 4 hours and 2 or 3 minutes, and I was bummed I didn't make it. A few years later, my friend said, "Hey, I want to run marathons. Do you want to join me?" I'm like, "Here it is. This is what I can do." So I said yes, and so that whole summer we just ran different marathons. Uh, I I ran the Maine Marathon. I ran a couple others. I ran the Marine Corps Marathon in DC. That was amazing. And then that was supposed to be the end of it. It was horrible. It was 80 degrees in DC. So I loved the run, but I hated the weather. Uh, and then he called me up in November and said, "Hey, in 2 weeks, there's the Philadelphia one." I'm like, "Well, we're already trained. We might as well." And so that one was 30 degrees and snowy. And that is when I finally broke my 4 hour marathon, and thought I was going to retire. A couple years later, my middle child, Davy, he's like, "Hey, Dad." I was tucking him in bed one night. He's like, "Dad," he's like, "I've decided I want to run a marathon before I'm 13." I'm like, "You realize you're 12, right?" He's like, "Yeah, I better hurry." So we found one that would accept a 12-year-old, and we started training, and that was by far my favorite marathon. Just, I mean, I have a captive audience, right? How many times do you get to hang out with your preteen for 3 hours at a time, and you're just running next to each other? So we had lots of great talks, lots of bonding experiences, and almost didn't do it because of some injuries and stuff like that. But we actually ended up doing it, and it was crossing that finish line with my 12-year-old was amazing. And you should have seen some of the looks as he was zipping past him in the last few miles. So it was fun. So I was a selectman for 4 years. So again, I do think that's relevant.
Okay.
You talked about the local, right? Getting local and politics and the difference you can make. So I lost my first vote as selectman by 50 votes against somebody who had been a selectman for like 13 years. And a month later, somebody resigned, and I'm like, "Hey, I've got the signs. I've already gone door to door. Why not?" And I won by one vote. So for
Wow.
months, people were coming up. They're like, "Hey, I voted. I was the one." I'm like, "You're right. Like all of you are right." So you can make a difference, right? A year later, because I was just finishing somebody's term, a year later, I was up for reelection and won by 220. So I guess I did something well in that year, and got the people's confidence, and it was exciting for that. I would have run again 3 years later, except for every time I left home, my little girl was like, "Daddy, another meeting." And I'm like, "You know what? There's going to come a time where you don't care when I leave, and I'll get involved again then." And hey, we're there. She's 16, and she's gone more than she's here. So uh, I'm a financial coach. I've been teaching Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University and coaching people for the last 19 years um, in the community up here, and absolutely love it. I'm a retailer, more specifically retail management. I've been in retail management for the greater part of the last 20 years, learning a ton from the School of Hard Knocks, and eventually getting my MBA in business and leadership. and I've been a store manager for the last 14 years. I
Wow.
grew up on a farm, and I'm part owner of a farm at this point, and we do grass-fed beef, grass-finished beef, pastured eggs, chicken, pork. Uh, Really doing that because healthy food matters, and our food sources these days, quite honestly, a lot of them I don't trust, and we need to look at our food situation in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. So, being a financial coach and teaching, I think you say Financial Peace University. Is that the one that you teach,
Yeah,
or
so
something?
that's
Yeah,
that's the class.
the
Yeah.
Dave Ramsey. Yep. So here's a question for you. So let's say you have a budget, and that budget, when you get to a point where you have a shortfall of about $400 million. Do you think that's a really great time to start a new initiative and spend
Huh.
more money? Is that appropriate? I can give you a more specific example.
I was gonna say, has this gone on? Yeah. Uh, I absolutely love where you're going. And no, when I look at this budget, right, I've been pretty critical so far of the current budget that Mills has proposed. And the reality is now, especially, so when you run into budget problems, right, you personally, me personally, or a state, right, you either have to, if you don't have enough money, you either have to boost your income or cut your expenses, right? That's what we have. Those are the two options. And so I could go get another job to boost my income if I needed to, or I could look at my budget and say, okay, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. Uh, I don't believe Mills when she did her budget, even considered cutting costs. I think she just looked and said, okay, how can we boost this income? And unfortunately for you and I, that boosted income means more taxes for us. And because the government doesn't make money, the government does not have any money that it doesn't get from we, the people.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And one of these recent, like, again, when you talk about, like, just in general, to your point, right? That when you have budget issues, you have to figure out what you can afford and what you can't afford. And you probably, in a situation like that, shouldn't add a $300,000 social equity program pushing affirmative action for business development, right? That seem appropriate?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Wholeheartedly agree.
yeah.
There's a number of things that we shouldn't be adding or keeping, for that matter, uh,
Yeah.
when you're in that kind of budget crisis.
Yeah. So it's good that you have a little bit of sense about that, because our current governor thinks that just it's so fascinating to hear the Democrats talk about stuff like this, because when they talk, when somebody critiques them, or they speak to the fact that people are frustrated or upset about it, they're just condescending, and they just act like, oh well, you guys don't completely understand, but we're doing everything that we can. We're trying to make Maine a better place, basically, is what they're trying to say. And the truth is that they just don't care about the impacts of their policy on the average person, and they don't actually have a plan that makes sense, which is why we continue to see our prices go up. So I'm glad that you actually have a sense of what a budget is, and sensible spending.
Yeah, and on a side note, right, again, whether it's a personal budget or a state budget, when you are writing and creating a budget, you are putting your values on paper, right? You are saying, "This is what is important to me." And so, for example, early on in my financial coaching, somebody came to me and they were just beside themselves. They were looking and saying, "The numbers don't add up. I can't get a balanced budget." Their answer was just live on a non-balanced budget. I'm like, "No, you can't do that. You're not the federal government, right?" And so uh, I looked and I'm looking through their budget and I'm like, "Well, you're spending $120 on TV here." And I mean, you would have thought I just killed, the family animal, right? Like it was just like,
Yeah.
We can't. There's no way. Like that was just no. Meanwhile, I don't spend money on TV, right? Like I'm like, okay, clearly TV is not the answer here, and so we had to look at other categories. But what you are putting in your budget is your values and what is important to you. And to your point, when I look at this budget and the current financial situation of most Mainers, and the cost of living has skyrocketed. I just read something for a family of four. I guess it's gone up to 136,000 for the state of Maine. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, last year was 115,000. So again, the cost of living is skyrocketing in the state, and Mills in her budget seems to not care about that at all. And so her values are not you and I and our ability to live in this state. It's these other things that you were talking about.
Yeah. So let's go back to so you were kind of building the case in the story of how you got to the place of running, and how you were select board, and you backed out for your kids. So why? Outside of the select board, and you said you served basically 2 terms. Is that like 6 years? Is that about
2 terms would be 6 years. This was four because my
a
first
partial?
election was a partial.
Okay.
So,
And
yeah.
so outside of the select board, what other political experience do you have?
None.
Okay.
How about
Well,
that?
yeah, no.
So honestly, when I went for selectmen, there were a number of people who looked at me and said, "Well, what makes you qualified? Why can you do this? You haven't been on the planning board. You haven't done this. You haven't been, involved in the town." And so it created a lot of really good conversations. I have no idea whether those individuals, voted for me the first time or whether they voted for me for reelection. Clearly, somebody voted for me in reelection that didn't vote for me the first time, but I don't know who it was. And so, yeah, no political. Honestly, even now, I'm looking and saying, as a candidate for governor, I'm not a politician. Yes, I've been a selectman for 4 years, but I don't look at myself as a politician. And when I launched the campaign, I really, as I was kind of going through in my head or on paper, like the pros and the cons, that was a con. Like to me, like that's a negative. As I've been talking to people for the last year and a half, it's really shifted dramatically to the pro side, where you know what, many people in that I've talked to, at least out of the thousands I've talked to, they look and go, yeah, that's a good thing. We're happy that you're not a politician.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because I think there's a line from the movie Gladiator, right? So in
Great movie.
Gladiator, oh, it's a fantastic movie, by the way. I'm a movie buff. If you haven't seen Gladiator, you absolutely need to. But there's a line in there where Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who's dying, or he sees he's approaching death, and he wants to appoint Maximus to be, in his place, to restore Rome to being a republic is kind of the idea. And Maximus is resistant because he's like, but I'm not a politician. Like, I've never been to Rome. I don't understand her politics. And his response is, that's why it must be you, because you have not been corrupted by her politics. Is kind of what he said. So there is, and I think people need to see this. There is a lot of value in having somebody come from outside the political realm. It's funny that people still ask this question, and I wanted to ask it because I think it is a little bit of a silly question in some ways. But like, what was Trump before he ran for president, right? He was not a politician. And I think that was the appeal. That's what people like. That's a big part of what people liked about him, is somebody coming from outside the swamp to, as he put it in 2016, drain the swamp. And I think he's working better at doing it this time than he did 2 years ago, 4 years ago, or 8 years ago. Geez, how many? But anyway, so not a lot of political experience. And you started in 2023. What was what I know the answer, but like, why? I think for a lot of people, you telling people that you're running for governor in 2026 and 2023, when the people of Maine like have a hard time caring about current politics in the state of Maine, let alone future politics in the state of Maine. What was the reason behind that?
Yeah, so in the fall of 2022, if you go back in the time machine and try to remember, right around October of 2022, SAD 17, which is our school district here in Oxford, uh, was the school board brought the AC AAA policy up. And the way it happened, it
And
came across. Yep.
what is the AC AAA
Yeah, sorry.
policy?
The AC AAA policy is, um, depending on who you ask, it is either they have the ability to uh, do transgender stuff with the kids without parents knowing. To me and hundreds of other parents, it basically it took parental rights away, and it made it so you as a parent couldn't know what was going on in the school district. For the sake of the kids being able to do what they wanted. And
Yeah.
so hundreds of us stood up and fought it. The way it also came the way it came about, it from an outsider perspective, right? Because that's what I was at the time. Uh, it felt like they were just trying to sneak it by, and all of a sudden somebody caught wind of it, and everybody knew about it, and hundreds of us parents stood up and spoke and fought against it. And I'm really happy to tell you that SAD 17 school board, they didn't vote it down, but they just let it die, and basically they tabled it, and didn't they haven't brought it back up yet. Uh,
Hmm.
During that process, again, my wife and I got really involved, and we worked um, uh, with so many people on it, and it was a fun process, and very glad we took care of it. My wife actually ended up the town of Paris, where I live, has a recall ordinance, and ended up using that to recall two of our school board members,
Wow.
and um, yeah, it definitely shook things up and sent a message. It was great, and my wife actually volunteered and ended up being appointed to serve on the school board, and then a year later, at the end of that year, she got reelected, and she's still on the school board, and she's on the policy committee. So we'll be able to let you know if anything comes up that we should be concerned of. So at that moment,
Yeah.
I looked and said, okay, again, my wife is now on the school board, and I just looked at her and said, listen, like, yes, it's 100%, it's a local issue, but we also, yeah, I'm watching the Department of Education where you know, they're saying like the basics don't matter. They're saying that we're focusing on the
Yeah.
social issues, right? And we're teaching all of the social pieces, and those matter more. And I said we need to change things in Augusta as well. And I'm one of those people who I look and I say I have the skills, I have the ability to do so. I'm not eager to do so, but
Hmm.
I have the skills, I have the ability. I need to do it. I'm willing to do it, so I need to do it. And if not me, then who? Right? If not now, then when? And I just looked in and said, we're in a crisis in this state, and somebody needs to stand up and do something about it. And I was willing to do so. Why? You kind of alluded to why 2023 when the election's 2026. Because Chuck, y you don't know me. Nobody knew me, right? Like, outside of
Yeah.
Oxford Hills, uh, nobody would have any idea who I was, and so I looked and said, "If I don't have name recognition, if I don't have I've not been in politics, if you will, and so I don't have my name out there, well, what I do have is time, and I've got 3 years that I can get a jump on people and, get started and get my name out there, and it's been highly successful. Quite honestly, when I look back, so July 2023 is when I officially launched, um, my campaign. There was a big hoorah, it was a big ordeal. Just kidding, there were about 7 people that knew, and, it was exciting to me and my wife. And since then, you know, I've been on social media, just getting my views out, talking about it, and my social media presence has grown dramatically to like I think between all of them, I have about 4,000 followers, and many of them are active and ready to go and ready to start a fight in Maine, right? The other thing that I've done is I really don't know how many, I've been all over the state in the last year and a half. We can talk a little bit about what that's looked like. It's been a blast. I'll even say I did a scooter trip. So I like a little foot scooter, like
Yep.
it was electric. So, but going uphill, my right leg still got a good workout.
Yep.
Started up in Fort Kent last May, and my mom came with me. It was the longest we've spent together in years. And so for 2 weeks straight, she drove the camper about 30, 40 miles and to, where we're ending for the day. And I would just scooter and meet people, see them in their driveway, stop, talk to them, stop in businesses, talk to them, and had an amazing time just talking to thousands of people in those 2 weeks all around the state. We went from Fort Kent all the way down to Kittery, and had a
Wow.
absolute blast looking at the state. And we only got drenched in rain once or twice. It wasn't bad.
That's nice at least. So well, cool. So yeah, obviously getting around the state and getting out there early. Obviously, I think you and I've talked before, so I know some of these things, and some other people may know them as well. But I think when I initially heard, I was like, wow, running somebody's coming to Cumberland County Republican Committee to talk about the gubernatorial race in 2026. What is this? But I mean, but you're, to your point, you're not known, and unlike Donald Trump when he ran from outside of politics, you don't have a TV show called The Apprentice, nor like you also I don't think anyway you were in Home Alone. It was that you weren't in that, right? Uh,
No. I had to remember.
and all the other things that Trump is, he's been a popular figure for most of his life, so it's a unique situation. So yeah, you got to get out there, you got to get people to know who you are. And obviously you got to start early when you're unknown. I think that is part of why sometimes people are like, why not run for House or Senate or something like that? Because in doing that, you're building that brand and name recognition, but you don't necessarily need to do it in order to get there. There's other ways, such as what you're doing. So, yeah. So tell me about so you talked a little bit about some of the things locally in schools and stuff like that, but what motivated you? Like, what are the main issues that you would say are your top 3 or your top 5, issues here in the state of Maine? What's broken? How's Janet failing, like Janet as well as, or Aunt Janet, as some people like to call her. But how is Janet Mills, our current governor, failing? And, what would you do differently?
Yeah, well, how many hours do we have, right? You
I'm
just
free.
you just
I get
opened
time.
up a can of worms right there.
Yeah.
Top issues, and again, I have the added benefit of talking to so many people around the state, and as I'm talking, little side issues come up, but time and time and time again, thousands of times, the economy is brought up. The cost of living is brought up. The cost of housing. Really, I would just call it cost of living, and in my opinion, I include the housing crisis, the energy crisis, and taxes and immigration. All of those really have a dramatic impact on our cost of living and economics as a broader topic. The other issue that I hear quite a bit about, and as I alluded to it earlier, education. Um, you know, uh, Quite honestly, whatever report you're looking at, a new one just came out the other day saying that Maine was among the worst, if not the worst, as far as from teachers going, right? Teacher attrition and
Oh,
what
wow.
it's like to teach in Maine. At the same time, some reports put us at like third from the bottom. Some reports put us at the very bottom as far as education in Maine, and like 24% of fourth graders can't read,
So,
and
so
27% or something.
But
Or
haven't
sorry,
you heard?
3-4 they're proficient. Sorry.
Haven't you heard from the wonderful Department of Education here in the state of Maine that that doesn't matter? Actually, these standardized tests, they don't really measure the intelligence and of a student, especially in a world with AI, where you don't need to have any knowledge or anything because AI will tell you what you need to know. Any question that you have, you can figure it out with AI. I don't
Yeah,
understand.
I hadn't heard DOE mention AI, but yes, I've certainly heard actually DOE, say, it doesn't matter. It's that's not our focus.
Oh,
And to me, that's even more scary,
mm,
that we're not focused on the actual. I look at it and when I live my life, I look and say, okay, I need to live my life on purpose, right? And so, what is the purpose of what I am doing? And I'm kind of weird that way, but I'm always looking and saying, okay, am I fulfilling my purpose? Am I doing this, or should I not be doing it? And I think the vast majority of Mainers, if not all of them, would look and say the purpose of our educational system is to successfully have our students prepared for life by being fully educated, right? I believe that that is what we all would say our purpose is. And I'm here to call it out and say, look, we have 24% proficiency in literacy, right? We have 26 or 7% proficiency in math. We are failing at our purpose. And somebody
failing miserably,
like,
miserably.
it's not even close. It's not even 50-50, right? Like we are failing miserably at our purpose. And so somebody from the outside needs to sit there and say, we need to start over. We need to look at, and Janet Mills in her budget was bragging that she was throwing more money at education. And my response was, I'm glad to see education is getting some attention. However, that is not what it needs. And as you see, there's graphs out there now that basically just show the cost of the amount of money we're spending on education is going up and up and up, and our results continue to go down. And so, money is not the answer. More money is not the answer. We need to admit we're failing, and we need a different approach.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I mean, I think throwing money at something is again, we have, as you said. I think I had done some research because when I ran in 2024, this last year, I ran for state house. Got a whopping 35% of the vote, which was 3% better. It was like almost a
Yeah,
10% increase from the 2 years before.
there
So
you go.
if I keep that up for another 10
Yeah.
years, I think. But no, I jest a little bit. Um,
Can I
one of
stop
the
you for a second though?
sure, sure.
Because again, I know that you ran and yes, you lost. Okay. And there are people who are listening and watching your podcast, and the reality is still like you created a conversation, right? You got some points out there, and to your point, you honestly you grew 10%. And so, but the reality is, we need people, whether they're going to win or not. We need people out there voicing the truth and talking about the topics that nobody wants to talk about. Talking about education when Janet Mills and the Department of Education say, "Oh, it's all good to go. We just need a little more money." No, we need to create a conversation out there. And thank you for running and creating that conversation down in the Westbrook area.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and thank you for doing something that I think I don't know that how many gubernatorial candidates have gone out and campaigned with people for House, especially in a place like Westbrook, was seen as a lost cause. So I appreciate you actually came out with me one day and helped me also collect signatures. I think that's one of the things that we were working on that day for a school board race, and so I appreciate you taking the time and coming out. But yeah, but I think you're right. I think this is how we win back our state. Like we don't win our state, we don't win the difficult districts by not trying in the difficult districts, right? How do you convince people of the truth? Is it by ignoring them, or by engaging them. And so we do need people to run in some districts that maybe in this election cycle, they're unwinnable. But if we never run anybody, if we never try to have conversation in those places, it likely will continue to be that way, right? If we don't have candidates, I think a lot of people will move to different areas. And so without having any hope that things could potentially get better, and we can look at some small victories, right? We don't have to, like, again, a 10% increase is a lot, especially when I was running against a long-term incumbent who's been involved in politics in my town for quite a while, well known in the community, has a food bank and owns a coffee shop, right? It's hard to beat somebody like that. But so to gain that percentage against somebody that's so well established in the town is really a lot. And she's got potentially, I think this is her third term, so she could run one more time. But eventually that seat's going to come up. And who knows? Maybe I'll run for that, or maybe I'll run for something else in the meantime. We don't really know what I'm going to do. I don't always know what I'm going to do. But the point is, like, we take over time. When she is no longer going to be able to run again, and I'm running against somebody who's not an incumbent, or somebody's running against that person, there's a lot more likely that somebody's going to be able to win. And but more than that, this is one of the things I talk about a lot, is like we actually need people to be willing to run races where they're likely to lose, because by running, you're helping the overall ticket, right? So one of the things I say is, like, here in Cumberland County, if we could raise the temperature 5%, if we could increase voting for conservative candidates by 5%, we win the state. That's the reality. That's like that. If we can grow by 5% in Cumberland County and do nothing else, I think we win the state. We'll win House, Senate. We have a chance at gubernatorial, and potentially, maybe someday, a Senate race where the conservative candidate is not, a moderate Democrat in Republican clothing, right? I have no problem with Susan Collins. She has been open and honest about who she is and what she stands for. And one of the things that this will upset some of the conservatives there that I appreciate about her is I have a pretty good sense about what she's going to do. She's pretty consistent. She sticks to her guns, and I don't agree with them. But at least in a world of lies and deception and politics, at least outside of the fact that she said she was only going to run for 2 terms, she's been fairly consistent. One of the most consistent politicians in the country. And so, but anyway, I would love to see an actual conservative, right? But in order to do that, we've got to raise the bar. In order to raise the bar, we need people willing to run and work hard in places where they might not be able to win. But anyway, that's an aside. What I was getting at is under education, and I think we're like ranked 9th or something along those lines in the amount of money that we spend per student on education in Maine. So spending more money on education isn't fixing the problem. We're somehow, this is an interesting fact that I learned as I was studying, we're 9th in education, but we're somewhere in the low 30s. Some reports put us even lower, but like on average, I think some of the things put us in the low 30s. So 9th in what we spend, but somewhere around 36th in how much we pay our teachers. Interestingly enough. Fun fact. But so we're spending a lot of money. We're not spending it on teachers. What are we spending it on? And we're not getting the results. And one of the things that I just, when they want to focus on the fact that, well, we actually these metrics don't matter as much, and we're focusing on social emotional learning. Or I remember in my town where we voted down the school budget, and then they reworked it, and they I think they cut $750,000 out of the budget, and then they were able to get it approved, barely. But there were some people that were still frustrated that it got approved, and they were saying, like, I hope we see some better return on investment with these kids, because, like, if our kids were like scholars and we're gonna go on and do great things, I think people have a lot less concern. They still care, but like they care a lot less how much money we're spending on education. But when the kids aren't doing well, and we're spending a lot of money on education, people get frustrated. And so there's an online forum, and somebody was commenting on this, and this is just the typical Democrat response, right? It's like, my kids are kind and smart. I don't care what those reports say. And it's like, I mean, the reports actually do matter, though, right? Like, because it's not just like, even if you want to say that this report isn't the most important thing in the history of the world, it's still not good that our students are last
Right.
or close to it, right?
Right.
That's not a good thing. Even if we're doing good over here, that's still bad. But anyway, I'm taking the
And
spotlight.
again,
Throw
especially
it
when
back
it's
to you.
measuring things, my opinion, the most important things, which are, do your students have the ability to read? Right?
Yeah.
Do your students have the ability to do math? Literacy, it's pretty important in this world, right? I hire
Keep
people,
yeah.
and I have interviewed people who can't read in Oxford Hills, and the reality is you need to be able to read, and you need to be able to do this, and so in complete transparency, we've homeschooled our kids, all three of them. To be fair, my wife did most of the heavy lifting. Uh, and she has done an amazing job. And it was eye opening to me when my oldest son went to the high school to do driver's ed. He came back and both my oldest son and my middle son both came back again 2 years apart. And after the first night, he came in like not an emotional kid at all, had tears in his eyes, and he was just like, I am so thankful for mom and what she has done. And his whole outlook on his schooling dramatically changed. He's like, there were so many kids there that couldn't read as they were
Mm.
just, they're doing the driver's ed thing, and they're just, the whole class, it sounds quite boring, but the whole class was just reading out loud, through this chapter or whatever. And he's like, so many of them just didn't have the basic reading skills. Now, there's scholars that are coming out of these schools. This is a wide brush, right? But the reality is, we have too many kids that are leaving and graduating our school without basic functions that will help them be successful in the rest of their life. And that is our purpose in these schools. And so, going back to it, we need to reimagine what our education system looks like in the state.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And like, what are your thoughts? Like, kind of what would be some things that you think we need to, when you say reimagine, like what do we need to do?
Yeah, so one of the benefits that I have to launching my campaign as early as I have is, I guess, or drawbacks, I don't know, uh, is I launched, and I'm still fine tuning my ideas, right? And so this is not a campaign promise, but it's where I'm at right now, and I look at it, and the conclusion I've come to as I've talked to administrators, I've talked to teachers, both current and ones that have left the school districts. And when I'm looking at the reports and studying all of this, the reality is that I've come to the conclusion that our current educational system is a monopoly, right? We When you think of a monopoly, think of the business world, this big conglomeration that has total and utter control, and basically you're stuck going to that business, and they don't care what you like, they don't care what you think, they're going to do what they want to do, uh, because they're the only option. And so all of that fits our education system. uh, there are, yes, you can go to a private school, there are some charter schools, but not very many. uh,
Yeah,
and
pretty
you
rare.
can do you yeah and you can do homeschooling, right? If you can make that work personally and financially,
Right.
right?
Well,
It's
and,
really hard.
yeah, because you would basically need likely a stay-at-home parent or grandparent, and you also probably, unless you're really, you're schooled in being a teacher yourself, it would be hard to do unless you're in an area where there's a co-op that you can participate in.
I was going to say, you're
They
getting
do
more and
have
more
those.
co-ops, and
Yep.
you're getting more and more curriculum that
Yep.
your normal parent who loves and cares for their kid, and can read. let's go back to the
Yep.
reading part, right?
Yeah.
Can do this. And so
Yeah.
it's gaining popularity like crazy, but the reality is there are a lot of things that can keep people from doing that. And so so even though those are options, they're really very small options at this stage.
Yeah.
And so our public school system is a monopoly. It's acting like a monopoly.
Yeah.
And we need to, we need to look at that and say we need to demonopolize, if that's a word, our education system. And to me, I feel like creating some sort of market educational system that encourages alternative modes of education, including micro schools, right?
Yep.
Let's say I can't, both my wife and I have to work, and but my sister-in-law, she's able to stay home and she's able to be a homeschooler. Can she take 4 or 5 kids, right? Can she take 10 kids, whatever she can feel like she can handle? And all of a sudden that's a micro school, right? The
Yep.
state will officially acknowledge that this is a school, and she can do that. Maybe she wants to, or somebody wants to uh, start up a micro school for kids who have problems learning, and they're only going to do 2 or 3 students, that, and focus on that area, that, those people that need it that way. I think that, again, I think if we all know, and I believe we would all readily acknowledge that smaller classrooms are more effective, right?
Yep.
To me, it's pretty, if you have a 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 student teacher ratio, right? Versus 30 to 40. It's just common sense that that's going to work better. And so we need to, as a state, we need to be willing, because right now we're going, no, that's competition. You're going to pull them from the public school. And
So
okay,
it's in
what's our
it,
purpose?
it's interesting you say that they're upset that competition. It sounds like they're saying competition is bad,
They
right?
do. They
But
do.
here in the United States, we have these laws, and you use the word monopoly, and I think that's exactly right here. They're called antitrust laws, or more commonly known as anti-monopoly laws. And what's the reason? You actually, it's because you want competition. It's because
Right.
when companies have to compete in the private sector, when companies
We
have
win.
to compete, exactly, the consumer wins, and in this case, it would be the parents. Like when you have more options, that means every option recognizes, hey, if I don't do a good enough job, people are going to leave me and they're going to go somewhere else. And that's a good thing. That should lead to competition, should lead to better education. Unlike, what was it? Just for fun, they in Brunswick, talking about how bad the scores are right now. There was a school board meeting in Brunswick, and the Unquirer, who I'm going to give a shout out to. I think he's a big part of the reason we have as many viewers as we do. He recently reposted us, and boosted. So thank you, Unquirer. But he had found this school board meeting, and there was a student there, or I think there was a student there. I don't know if she was the one who was talking about this, but they were basically talking about eliminating valedictorian and salutatorian and class rankings, so because kids are stressed about it. And like, don't get me wrong, I care about kids' emotional state, but I also care about their ability to cope with life. And we are creating this whole SEL baloney, is creating kids who are incapable of coping with the realities of life. um uh, and I don't think, like, talking gently and be is what's actually going to help them. There's a lot of things I could say about this, but I'll shut. But anyway, to the point is, competition is good. That's actually good. We need to spur these kids on to work harder, and we need to spur the schools on to teaching more effectively. Anyway, there. But
Not
continue.
only though, but you're hitting on a good point, because not only are we, for the same reason, I'm sure, right? Not only are we discussing uh, taking away the competition, but the reality is we are at least, and again, this is not every school district. I have not personally visited every school district. I can tell you ours, right? I can tell you some others that I was talking to a former teacher um, that left because he just couldn't handle the school system, right? And I was chatting with him and saying, okay, tell me, like, give me this feedback. Where was the school? He just left a couple of years ago. I'm like, tell me what, give me an example. And he's like, we are, he's like, Robert, we are lowering the bar so much. He had, he's a science teacher, and he had a student in a required class. He was a senior in a required class. He's like, he couldn't tell me for sure that the students showed up at all. He thinks he may have showed up on day one, but he couldn't remember exactly, right? So anyway, the student, for all intents and purposes, didn't come to class. Okay. Didn't turn in papers, didn't take tests, like all the things that come with not coming to class, right? Like, I'm like, so did you fail him? He goes, yes, absolutely. He's like, I'm principled and he didn't do the work. He doesn't pass. He failed. He goes, but he graduated. And I'm like, what? Like, how? He goes, that's not my decision. The administration graduated him. And so I've heard there are school districts who have gotten rid of the grade level D, right? Like, back when I went to school, you had, A, B, C, D, F, right? They got rid of D. Well, why would you get rid of D, right? That leaves A, B, C, and F, right? And so there's this big gaping hole. Well, you now, as a teacher, are forced, if somebody is doing really, really, really poorly, you are forced with a decision. Do you give them an F or do you give them a C? By the way, it is frowned upon and looks poorly on you if you have too many people with Fs. So you give them the C. By the way, what does that do? Look, our averages are going up. It's amazing, right? Because your teachers are forced into this place. And so we are lowering the bar for the next generation, and then they go out into the world of work and they're shocked when they have to show up. They're like,
I,
well,
yeah,
I was busy this weekend. Like,
yeah.
it's Monday. I'm not feeling good. I'm gonna call, like, as business owners, right? As we're going, you have to show up.
I had a coworker. We could talk about education forever, so I think we'll move on in just a second. But because I think there's some other issues. One is I think your idea that you're talking about. I don't know if you're familiar with Yes Every Kid, but it's an organization. Nick Murray, who used to work for the Maine Policy Institute, was on the podcast a while back, and he talked about this exact strategy about a marketplace for education. And I think it's a great idea. I would check him out if you haven't. Anybody else, check out that podcast too. And we talked about education, but yeah, and then I lost my train of thought. Well, there we go. Well, I guess we're
All
moving
right.
on.
We'll wrap up
Um,
education.
yeah, I guess so. But yeah, I'm glad that education is on your list of one of the things that needs to change in Augusta, because I think that education is our future. I also think that if you're out there and you have the capacity at this point, the education system is so bad. I would find a way to homeschool if you can, or look at some other option, because
And get on your local school board. They need
yeah.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. If you get, yeah, and I was going to say one of the things I find is interesting, and I wonder if it's controversial, is you said that your wife is on the school board, but she homeschools.
Uh, it's not controversial. Nobody's brought it up. I don't know how many people know it, but the reality is, right? Yes, we don't have any kids in the school district, but by the way, they still get all of our tax money. So we're heavily invested in the school district, and she has a bachelor's in education and has spent the last 15 years, 18 years, whatever it is, teaching. So she is absolutely, I'd go toe to toe with anybody. She is absolutely qualified and the right person to
Absolutely.
be on there. But yes, we don't have any kids physically going there.
Yeah, well, I think like having a smart person who made wise decisions to take care of her children, and again with the background that she said, that's somebody that you want on the school board. And regardless, I think there's this idea that some people have that you need to have children in the school system to be a good candidate for school board, and I just think that's false. Like a lot of times, parents who have, especially if they have kids in those age ranges have a difficult time being able to commit to being on the school board. So I think we
Yeah.
need to dispel that myth. Do we have a person who's intelligent, who cares about education, cares about our kids and wants to see them succeed, and wants to make sure that our tax dollars are used wisely? That's somebody we want on the school board, regardless of whether or not they have children in the district. So cool. So yeah, again, like love that you're talking about education, because it really is one of the most important issues in how we save our future. The future of the future of our state. So what are some other issues that like are kind of top? Actually, before we leave the world of education, let's jump over. We talked about this a little bit, but there are a couple of things that are going on, and you've talked a little bit about it. But what do you think about Maine's decision to allow boys to compete in women's sports?
100% against it. I and it blows my mind that the many of the same people who for years fought for women's rights are now throwing it out, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and are, you know, just saying, "Oh, well, this person says that they're a woman." The reality is, men and women are very different in many ways, and physically is absolutely one of them, the most obvious one. And men participating in women's sports is dangerous for our women, and not to mention unfair. But
Yeah, it's fascinating that Title IX, that the school lawsuits are coming, right? This is what I see, because like Title IX is a federal law that ensures that basically it created this space for women to be able to compete, and now we're taking that space away because of some people who have a mental illness. I'm sorry if you're hearing this and you disagree, but like that's just a fact. It's always been classified as a mental illness, but people today seem to see it as something other than what it is. Partly because we've got somebody. There's a book that I was told to read, and I think the title alone will kind of express the point. Toxic empathy. We as a culture have toxic empathy, where we care too much about wanting to trust somebody and believe in somebody, that we will agree with things that are absolutely obviously false. And so we need to obviously I part of the reason I wanted to go there, Robert, is I think that like for the Republican Party, whether it's you running for governor or any other candidate, I think this issue is an issue to run on. I think we need to have this issue near the top, because we can actually say that we're actually the pro women party. We're the party who cares about women. We want them to succeed. We want to protect their spaces, and I think that there are a lot that's going to help us. Most of the people in our country do not agree with this insanity. Somewhere around 80% of the people are on our side here, and so I think we need to emphasize that. But anyway, that's an aside. That's for free. Um, Go
we're
ahead.
also seeing, right, like we're seeing the trend of that shifting slowly,
Mhm.
um, outside of the US and now a little bit in the US. And I believe Riley Gaines just got her medals back or something. But
Yep.
we are
Yep.
starting to see this shift, and Maine is digging in and saying, "No, we won't go," and clinging on to these. They're just, it's not common sense, right? It's just not a reality. And yeah, we can move on, but I
Yeah.
agree with you completely, and we need to protect our women.
Absolutely. So, what are some of the other issues what some of your other top issues? I think in this with what's going on in our state right now. We've talked a little bit about it. I think maybe this is one. So I'll kind of give you a little bit of a lead. Maybe this will be
Yeah.
fun to talk about. When you were coming around talking with me, energy, right,
Yeah.
and cost of living was one of the big ones that you mentioned. And you mentioned something that I was like, man, I need to talk to more other people who are running for office, because like I have my areas of specialty and other people do. And you mentioned, one of the solutions that you had there for how do we lower the cost of energy, and it had to do with micro nuclear. Is that
Micronuclear. Yeah.
yeah?
So uh, I am certainly not a nuclear scientist, right? I'm not the by any stretch even close to the smartest man in the room for nuclear or many other topics. But one of the benefits that I've had over the last year and a half is people who are much smarter than me have been sending me information and articles and different things like that. And micronuclear has been one of those topics where some very smart people have been sending me. And the reality is, with micronuclear, so basically what it is, it's the same technology. My understanding is it's the same technology that's in our nuclear submarines, and it takes up basically a double wide or a trailer, not even double wide, but like a train trailer kind of size, right? So
Wow.
really quite small. And I believe, if my math is correct, you could probably get away with four of those to power our entire state.
Wow.
And so the reality is, right, like, again, it's not a huge footprint, and we could be energy exporters if we just went down this road first and did it well, and we could figure it out. So what I am saying, what my campaign is saying is what we're currently doing is not working. We are
Yep.
subsidizing highly inefficient and insufficient energy forms in the form of wind power and solar, right? By definition, I don't know if you saw, but it gets dark early in Maine during the winter, right? So your solar panels are not working 50% of the time, and I'm being generous with 50% these days. We won't even cover,
Yeah.
talk about the snow cover on them this morning, right? And so
Yep.
the reality is solar and wind just don't have what it takes to supply our entire state with energy and be our major sources. And so we need to immediately start back up going with hydro, and we need to explore and figure out what it would look like and start going down the path to nuclear and figuring out what that can look like in our state. um, Whereas the reality is, uh, everybody who's pushing solar and wind are doing it because it's green. And I think if you were to look, right, if you were to look from when you first start and say, we're going to make this solar panel, or we're going to make this windmill, the amount of energy that it takes to create the metal and to ship the metal to the place you're going to be putting it, and to put it up and to maintain it its whole life, and then you don't get to recycle it at the end. They're just laying there in a windmill graveyard, and the solar
Yep.
panels even worse, right? How green are these, right? Like, how are they
Yeah.
even net energy net positive? You can't just look at a one little window once it's up and it's functioning, right? Like, there's a lifespan here, and how green are they really? And so nuclear is one of the cleanest forms of energy, and I believe it will be, and many people are saying it's the energy of the future. And so Maine just needs to explore that and look at that as a very valid option.
Well, I think it's interesting when you look to. There are a couple of things that I'll say about this, but when you look to like industry, like the private sector, right? If they're doing it, then it's probably more cost effective than right. So, one of the things that I found to be interesting is, despite the push against nuclear, there's a huge fear, and it probably has to do with what happened in Chernobyl, and and a number of other things. Which, by the way, that's also a great thing to watch if you haven't seen the Chernobyl special on HBO. I have lots of advice about what to watch. I watch too much stuff,
Just
but
getting
anyway,
my movie list going here,
yeah.
like movies
Um,
from Chuck.
um, so I think there's a bit of fear there, but I was surprised to find that Google, which is one of the companies that is, they're very woke. They're all about the environment, right? And they announced that they were going to, in order, this is what's crazy. I think that the woke people who want to reduce our carbon footprint are also the ones pushing AI in education, right? We talked about that. But AI is very expensive. Like, AI uses, people don't know this, it uses a ton of energy. And so, in order to combat that, because Google and other companies are doing all this AI stuff, Google is going to be building, I think is what they said, 6 nuclear power plants I believe in the United States of America, and I think on the West Coast because they're located in California. But like, just think about that for a second, right? If they're doing it, they're super. Why are we not considering it here? And I always like to point to Reagan Paul, who I hope at some point will get to come on the podcast, because she's always on. If you follow her on Facebook, or she's on Twitter now, and she's posting updates. But she always posts like how much energy is being created by these things. So apparently all the wind turbines in New England, this was on January 31st, right? All the wind turbines in New England were contributing 0.6, that's less than 1%, 0.6% of the power grid. Solar 0.45. And yet we have this net energy billing where we're being charged money every single month to be able to build and maintain the infrastructure. On top of that, we had Jerry Lehman, who is in charge of NEFSA, New England Fishermen's Stewardship Association, and he was talking about how these windmills were put in a certain place where somebody got hay, and it was making the hay toxic, so that they couldn't feed it to their animals anymore. Right? So like these things that are supposed to be like helpful, good for our environment are actually not. And same thing with the windmills, not the windmills, the solar panels. Elon Musk is big on solar panels. Obviously, that's part of his business with Tesla. That's a part that not people don't know as much about. And he's made the comment that we could power most of the country with solar. Maybe if we put them in Arizona, right? Like, something like in the desert, right? That's good. But here in Maine, like, these things are just not positively contributing. We spent so much money in taxes to get them here, and again, when you look at the full life cycle, as you've said, they just don't pan out. And I think that I loved when you mentioned the micro nuclear, because it helps with, it's green, right? It's clean energy. And I guess the thumbs up keeps coming up. That's fun. But it's clean energy, and it's also producing more at a cheaper cost than our current situation, which is absolutely
it's highly
insane.
efficient, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why we have to subsidize, or we're choosing. Okay, we don't have to. We
We
shouldn't be
definitely
doing
don't.
it. But the reason we're choosing to subsidize is because the companies who are doing this wouldn't make any money otherwise, because it's inefficient and it's ineffective.
Well,
And
and some of
as
them
far as
aren't. Like,
solar and wind.
I feel like this falls into the same category. It's slightly different, but electric vehicles and the electric buses. Have you seen about all the electric buses in Maine that are they're not
Yeah,
in
I
operation?
actually, so our local school board was considering, because they got a great deal, right? They're getting these free electric buses. This company is going around to all the school districts in Maine and trying to get the free electric buses. And so,
Free
yeah,
means
exactly. Yes, free.
federal
Um,
grant money and state
yeah,
grant
so
money, which just
getting,
means
yeah,
we're paying for it.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
guarantee you this that company is getting money, right? Just
Yep.
it's free money, just as far as the school board is concerned, right? It's other people are paying for it. And so I reached out to, I'm trying to remember, Winthrop, I think it was, and talked to the school superintendent and asked a bunch of questions and said, hey, and I could send it to you, but basically I interviewed him and said, how do you, and it was a terrible experience, unsafe and unreliable, and uh, all of his people at the bus depot, or whatever you want to call it, like, couldn't fix them, right? Anytime something was wrong, other than a wiper blade or something like that, like, they'd have to ship them out. And last I heard, a year later, they still haven't gotten them back yet. So yes,
Yeah.
let's go with EVs and
Yeah.
electric buses in
Yeah,
Maine.
it's a really great virtue signal that is not helping, and what's really interesting again is that the company that made a lot of these is not going into bankruptcy yet. Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of what they've effectively said. I think this was another Main Wire story. Thank you to the Main Wire for all the good reporting that they're doing, which is helping in the fight against the radical left. That was not an advertisement, but it seems like it was. But yeah. So okay. So in energy, that makes sense. And what are some other things that like are your top initiatives that you would want to implement if you're elected governor of the state of Maine.
I think another piece, again, we're still in the cost of living sector here,
Yeah.
but is housing, right? It's a basic supply and demand problem. And this is very relevant to me because they're 16, 18, and 20. And, my 20-year-old's in my basement and, he, he's got a job, he's working, like, I'm like, hey, let's get you out. Let's get, but the reality is I checked on a house that I'm like, oh, that's got to be, 200,000, right? Like that, I felt that was a high price for what I would want to pay for that really small house. And they were selling it for 350. And I'm like, holy cow, like this is crazy. What are our kids gonna do? Right? What are, again, I say kids, like, 20, 30, anybody who hasn't bought a house yet, what are they going to do? Because housing prices in Maine, cost of living are crazy, and our current administration and Democratic House and Senate are not helping things. And so, again, it's in my opinion, it's a basic supply and demand problem. We need to increase supply and we need to decrease demand. And so, going through really quick, some of those things that I think we could do that aren't being done is. Quite honestly, we can decrease demand for housing by helping ICE decrease the number of illegal criminals in our state, right? On a side note, I feel that
Yeah.
allowing people to come in illegally and stay here is a slap in the face to those who go through the very lengthy, very costly legal process that we have set up. Yeah, go ahead.
That's what I'm going through. My
Yeah,
wife is current.
right.
My wife is currently in Kenya. She's Rwandan but lives in Kenya, and
And
we're
it's not
waiting.
an easy process, right? It's not fun. It's costly and it's
We're about
lengthy.
we're about 17 months in, and we're hoping it's going to be quicker than this, but the embassy in Kenya is very backed up. And typically it takes a while, and like we've submitted the last thing that we need to submit to the National Visa Center, and now they've got to review those documents and then schedule our interview. And it can take like a couple of months just for them to schedule the interview, and the interview, it could be as far as a year from now, is what
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
the data is suggesting. And so, we're going through the legal immigration process, despite the fact that some people tried to suggest that I was harboring an illegal immigrant. I'm not. She is not here. She when she gets here, she will be here legally. But yeah, it's a difficult process.
And I'm not gonna say it's the best process. If we want to make that more efficient, if we want to,
Absolutely.
right, like if we want to address the process and vote on the process and change that process legally, great, let's do it. But the reality is, this is what we have for a legal process, and if you are not following that legal process, you are not following the law. Therefore, you are a criminal. So we could certainly free up some housing by addressing illegal immigrants. We could also decrease demand for housing by, quite honestly, not giving free stuff to anybody who's here illegally. Right? We're giving housing. We're giving medical stuff. And so we are luring them to our state. Even though I don't believe we are officially a sanctuary state, we certainly act like it, right? I don't
Well,
think
we
we have the
we
title.
we have a couple of counties that are,
We
so
we have some,
Cumberland
yes.
County, and I think what's the other one?
Isn't Ellsworth area?
Wherever, I think the Bangor, whatever county Bangor is in. Why I can't
Yeah.
think of that off the top of my head. Maybe is it Lincoln County? Is that what that is? Yeah. Um,
Bangor is not in Lincoln County, but
okay, I have to look it up. But
I was
anyway,
thinking,
there's a
yes,
couple of
there
counties.
are a couple,
Yeah.
at least cities, if not counties. But
Yeah.
but as a state, we are not officially a sanctuary state. But the reality is, we are, and we are acting like one,
Yep.
and our policies do that. So we also we should increase supply by shutting down illegal marijuana grows. Right? We know that there's uh, a couple hundred at least of those around. And if we're able to shut those down, that frees up some housing for the market. And I had a really good meeting down in southern Maine just last week, where I met with a bunch of construction guys and just just chatted with him, said, "Hey, listen, what regulations? Like, what do you see out there? What we need housing, right? Why aren't you building me more houses?" And the stories I heard, one guy is still working on a project, and he was really frustrated. I'm like, okay, like how long's this been? Like 3 months, 4 months, and he's talking to me about all the bureaucratic red tape that he's going through, especially with uh, the Department of Environmental Protection, and I'm like, okay, like 3, 4 months, 5 months, yeah. And he's like, I'm going on 4 years. And I'm like, holy cow. Again, just do this. Okay, he does this. Okay, do this. Okay. And he's just going through doing their stuff and jumping through their hoops. And they're making it impossible. And so we need to look at our regulations. Keep Some regulations are absolutely critical, right? But some aren't. Uh,
Yeah.
my brother-in-law is in construction, and he was telling me about a town that is now making it a requirement that the outlet on your island, kitchen island, is put on the top of the counter because, like, apparently there's some sort of danger with it possibly being on the side. I'm like, that's just like,
Ugh.
this is not what our government is intended to do, right? We're not intended to say, hey, your outlet's in the wrong place. When we were
Well,
building our
there,
house, right? Like, they made the construction guys come back and fix our stairs because there was the nosing, and they didn't have anything that went like that, to make it more gradual, and so we might trip on the stairs. And I'm like going, again, this is not our government's job to make sure I don't trip on my own stairs. By the way, we took the carpet off, and we don't have that anymore. We just have the nosing. Yeah, I'm like going, but that's okay. But if it's covered with carpet, it doesn't work. So again, it's just these types of things that construction people have to, we need to simplify things and make it so it doesn't take them as long, and it's not as costly of a process to build houses for us.
yeah, absolutely. I was talking to a builder too. Like, I used to work in banking for about 15 years, and I was talking to one of my clients who said, a younger guy, industrious, trying to grow his business, right? And he was saying that in order for him to break even, this is not making a profit. This has nothing to do with the materials. He has to charge $65 an hour per employee, right? That's in order to not lose money, right?
Yeah.
And that's because of regulation. And I
Yep.
imagine he had to increase that with the new payroll tax and a lot of
I
these
was
other
just gonna
things.
say,
So you've got regulations that are crushing them and making it really expensive, and some of that is on the city level. And the question is, like, my fear is that they're doing this intentionally, in part, and that the state government is going to uh, tell towns what they can and cannot do. What do you think about that? Do you think that we should pass some laws at the state level that there are certain regulations that go overboard, or do you think we should let towns and cities, make their own decisions? So in Portland, for instance, I know that I had a friend who was just trying to do some minor, like, updates to his house. I mean, not maybe minor's an understatement, but he was just looking to do some renovations, and he was waiting on the city to approve them. And their response to him was, eventually, after he'd been waiting for months and months and months, was, "We know you've already done it. We're going to get to it eventually." Right. And that, because they know how slow they are at approving these things because of how ridiculous the regulations are in Portland, that they expect people to do the work before they get the permit. So
that's
how do,
crazy,
like,
right?
is that something we should address at a state level, or what do you think there?
No, to me, I'm a small government guy, and I
Yeah.
really don't think that getting getting the state involved in and usurping control over local municipalities is the answer. I do like LePage did the business friendly thing, right? And so there was a list of things that you could do to earn this business friendly
Hmm.
title and sign. And I like that as a concept. It's as an idea.
Yeah.
It's a here are some guidelines on things that you can do to help businesses do, and be more business friendly, which will help us. And here are the benefits to that. And we strongly encourage you to do so. And so, like, again, I don't know, again, he's already done it. Do we need to go back? Do we need to change it? Do we need to look at it? But I like that idea of advising and helping and encouraging. But I don't think we need big government in Augusta. Uh,
Yeah.
Honestly, my opinion is anytime the government gets involved, things get messed up.
Yeah, I challenge people. It was kind of funny, actually. I think when you were going door to door, we went to somebody's house, and they happened to be friends of mine. And one of them asked the question, like, "What do you think the government is doing well?" And she has this idea that, like, if you can't say something good about about what's happening, then I don't know that I want to support you. And my response, though, is like, I challenge you to show me an area of government where they're efficient and they're actually doing a good job, and outside of like the IRS, right? They're great at taking our money, right? But
I don't
outside
know
of
how efficient they are. Right?
that's
The
sure, yeah,
reality is, right? Like the reality is, they could just take it straight from a paycheck. They don't need to go through, and again, they needed 87,000 allegedly, right? Like, IRS agents. So I don't know how efficient they are, but they are effective at taking our money for
yeah.
sure.
That part they're good at. Yeah, they're definitely not efficient internally, and the tax code is so complicated. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a conservative, and is an accountant, and he's like hoping he's kind of hoping, right? He's an accountant. His whole business is built around this, but he's like, if Trump takes it down, that's great. That's fine. I'll find another way to make money. Right. And I'm like, I love it because that's what we need. Right. But there are a lot of people that don't feel that way. So accountants, because again, that's how they make their money. The government makes it complicated. But yeah, so definitely, I think like, attacking, because I think going back to regulation, as you're saying, I think there are state regulations on certain things, in addition to city regulations that are
Yeah.
largely like unnecessary. And it's just like, let the cities regulate themselves, and then the people get to decide what kind of regulations they want in their town. And if we can deregulate this area, we can have more housing, and that will drive down the cost of housing, and that'll make it so that people can be able to afford to own a house. Again, working in banking, you said that you worked with, you do Financial Peace University and help coach people on finances. And like the reality is, like one of the best, the single best wealth building tool for most people is their house, is buying a house. And we're living in a society where the World Economic Forum and these global elites don't want you to own a house, because they want you to, as they have it on their website, they want you to own nothing and be happy and just rent everything. And they get, obviously, as our overlords, they will tell us when we can do what they allow us to do, that doesn't appeal. It doesn't appeal to me.
Isn't it funny? These conspiracy theorists come out, right? Like, isn't it funny that just a few short years after they've come out and said you will rent everything and you will love it, right? Like you won't own your own home. All of a sudden, our housing prices get skyrocketed, right? Like,
Yeah.
uh, again, some could argue that it feels like it might be intentional.
Well, it doesn't help that I don't know how much they're doing this here in the state of Maine, but BlackRock, Vanguard, J.P. Morgan
Yes,
Chase,
yeah,
a number of other large financial organizations, and then others that are a little bit more shady, even, are buying up residential single family homes
yeah,
in our country in order to be able to rent them back to us so that we can't own them because they can pay more for them. And it's a great long term investment for them. And they also get to control us. So, yeah, that's great.
yeah.
Is there
Yep.
is there something we can do to address that here in the state of Maine?
Honestly, right? Could we have the legislature pass something saying that they can't buy those single family dwellings?
Yeah.
It would definitely be something worth looking at. And
Yeah.
again, you don't
Yeah.
want to stifle somebody who's buying. Let's say I've got a good friend who buys houses. He has probably 4 or 5 rentals, right? Like you don't want to stifle that. That's not who we're talking about. That's not what we're
Right.
talking about. We're talking about the Black Rocks and these major conglomerates that come in, swoop in, and they pay a high dollar amount for price, for housing, um, just to have a monopoly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a small time landlord, and I feel a little bit guilty owning single family homes. Like, I actually sold one this last year because I was like, you know what? There's a family that needs to live here. I don't need to rent it to somebody else. But yeah, I think primarily targeting. Again, I don't feel like we should have a policy that doesn't allow people to do that. But I do think targeting like the really big corporations that
Right.
are doing this, I think would be great. And, I'm trying to think. I got lost in my own thought. This is what I do. So, what's another of your like campaign initiatives that you think is like one of the most important,
I'm
one of
going
your
to
top
take one
issues?
second. I wasn't expecting it to go this long, and my computer's about to die on me. So I need to go
Okay.
grab a charging cord. All right. I'll be right back.
No problem. This will give me a good opportunity to remind everybody who's watching and listening that we create this content in order to give the people of Maine more information on what's going on here in the state of Maine. We are going to create some smaller clips of what's going on. Your part, in addition to listening and knowing and being able to share the information that you hear through this podcast, is to take those clips, take all the different places in social media. We've got Muddy Waters is on YouTube, Rumble. We're here on Twitter. Geez, even TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all these places, including Spotify and Apple, is find the smaller content, like, share, subscribe, so that we can get more information out to the people of Maine. That's your part. That's how you can help. And yeah, that would be great. So thank you for doing that. And yeah, so actually let's kind of we don't need to talk about any other policy issues. I think I want to be mindful of your time, but there are a couple other questions I have for you. So have we talked about other, like, because obviously you're running as a Republican candidate, and so far you're the only candidate to have declared, but there
If
is
there was a
like
vote today, Chuck, I'd win.
that's exactly right. So I believe there is going to be at least one other candidate. I've heard that it's rumored that another Robert will be running. A guy, again, it's not confirmed. It's not official at this point, but the rumor is that Robert Charles is going to be running for governor. We don't know for sure. Again, that's unconfirmed, but it's likely either way. If it's him or if it's somebody else, you're going to have an opponent.
I won't be
And
alone.
right. You won't be alone running as a Republican. I have a couple
Guaranteed.
questions. Number one is why, if it's hard to tell when you don't necessarily know who your competition is, but if there are options, why should people pick you?
Uh, if there are other options, why should people pick me? Because I'm a nice guy. No, uh, the reality is, with all sincerity, right? We don't know. I guarantee you, there will be probably many options out there. I expect that the field on
Yep.
both sides will be absolutely full, because Janet Mills is not able to run again.
Yep.
So, but with all sincerity, it can't be about Robert Wessels.
Yep.
It's not for me. It's not about Robert Wessels. It has to be about Maine, and it has to be about what is right for our path forward. And so again, I jumped in because we need. I believe I have what it takes, and we need an option to go down that path, and we need somebody to say all the things that haven't been being said, and to call out whether it's education or taxes, to call out the direction that we're going. And so uh, ultimately, I do believe that my business background, my experience, and my love for all things financial absolutely help. I think more than anything, being a non-career politician, just a regular Mainer, is it's in the pro category, right? And I
Yep.
think that absolutely helps. And so, uh, and quite honestly, when I'm looking, yes, I have to win the Republican primary to get into the general election. But and I'll certainly be looking at those people, whoever it is that's in the primary with me. But my focus will be on the general. My focus is on
Yep.
the liberals who are going to continue to destroy our state and make it so it gets to the point of beyond repair. And whoever it is that wins the Republican primary has to be focused on that. And when I live my life focused on the end goal and focused on the purpose. And the reality is, if I lose to somebody who is going to absolutely take us in the right direction and, is very similar in many of my views, then I think Maine wins, right? And
Yeah.
I would absolutely endorse them and say, hey, thank you, great job beating me, and let's go, right? Like we
Yeah.
have a state to win. It isn't about Robert Wessels. It can't be. It never has been. It's about Maine, and I don't know who's going to be in the primary. And the reality is, we just need to focus on the general election and win.
Yeah. Well, I really like that perspective. I think one of the things that sometimes happens when people run for offices and they don't win, they just disappear, because we're not, a lot of people who run aren't running for the right reasons necessarily. But I love the perspective. So if you for whatever reason don't win the primary, you will put your weight behind whatever candidate did. This is what you
Yes,
essentially said. As long as you agree with them in
yes,
principle.
yes, correct. Like,
Yeah.
yes, and I expect I'll agree with most of them, but yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome, because I think that no matter what happens, right? Like you running, especially the way that you've done it, you've done positive things for people here in the state of Maine, including helping, helping a school board candidate get elected, and helping, helping me in my campaign. So I appreciate that.
On a side note, little free advertisement here. I have just made the decision, haven't made it public yet, but on February 22nd, I'm going to be heading to Bangor to help with the special election.
Ah,
Whatever they need help with, doing door to door, whatever they need help with. And I would love it if a bunch of your followers and mine joined us, and we just had a party up there on, again, that's Saturday, February 22nd. That is 3 days before the actual election. And so it would be amazing to flip that seat.
we need to flip that seat. It'll get us closer. We might be able to stop some crazy things that the Democrats are
Yes.
doing here. So I really appreciate you bringing that up and reminding us of that. Anybody who can make it to that, be sure to show up. If you need more information, feel free to reach out to myself, or Robert. So one of the last things that I'll ask is, it looks like it'll be really interesting. This is a lot of speculation and a lot of theory, but it's all the indicators. I kind of hinted at this when I talked about Maine Wire articles and how Jared Golden is frustrated with his party, because of their rhetoric or whatever around Donald Trump, and they're constantly being whining basically about what's going on. That's not a direct
I'm
quote, just for the
frustrated with
record.
their party too. It's one of the things I agree with Jared on. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot that frustrates me about his party.
Yeah, so it's looking like all the indications. Like he had an interview on Maine Policy with Matt Gagnon, and all the indicators seem to suggest that he's likely to run for governor here in the state of Maine. And the question will be, it'll be really interesting. This could be a really interesting election cycle, because he's been talking in the interview with Matt Gagnon. He also shared about like his frustrations with his party. He did say he wasn't ready to give up on it, right? This is what he's saying, but it's the way that he's talking. Like Jared Golden, I don't agree with him on policy on a lot of things, right? And I think he did change his mind about gun rights, and he's not really on the same page as us on the Second Amendment. But he's really sharp and smart politician in the way in which he presents things, and when he presents them, he's really good at that. But what I'm sensing is that it definitely looks like he's going to be running for governor, and I think there's a decent chance he runs as an independent. Because I was thinking about this, and I feel like it would be really difficult. He's not liberal enough, I think, to win a primary against somebody
You
like
don't think so?
I,
I don't
I,
know. I
it'll be tough, because like he's coming out against the windmills. He's coming out against a number of other things that are like, that's anathema. If you want to be part of the cult that is the Democrat Party, you have to support those types of things. You can't say things like what he's currently saying about his party being upset with Trump. You can't say that within the Democrat Party and get away with it.
I would like to, if he's
I
going
would,
to
I would,
run,
I would
right?
love
Like
a
if he,
world in which that can happen, but
I think he could do it. So here's my perspective, right? Again, I look and the Shelley Pingrees, the Shenabellos, right? Like they are pulling the Democratic Party so far left. I had
yeah,
a wonderful conversation with a Democrat who's been following me and really supports me. And I was talking to him about just different topics and things like that. And the reality is, you know, he's one of those old time Democrats that his party has left him, right?
mhm.
He's Democrat in name only. And so I believe that you have a bunch of these progressives, quote unquote. I think they're more regressive, but
Yep.
liberals who are pulling their party that far. And I think your Jared Goldens, who I wouldn't put in that camp, it would be really interesting to see if he pulls again. If you end up with a primary with just the more liberal ticket, I wonder how many of those Democrats are going to come to an independent or come, you know, even to a Republican side and just be sick and tired of it. Same thing with RFK, right? Same thing with
Yep.
Tulsi, same thing with Elon. All of these, there's a ton of people out there who are looking at their party and saying, this is crazy. They don't have any common sense and they're tearing apart our world. Look at our economics in Maine, right? And so my argument would be it would be good for the state if he was to pull a bunch of them and win the Democratic ticket.
Yeah, I definitely think it would be better to have somebody less insane as a as a Democrat candidate. Obviously, I want the Republican candidate to win. I say obviously, most likely, assuming there's somebody whose values I also agree with. Um, uh, right. Um, yeah, we don't know who that will be, whether it's you or somebody else, whoever is the Republican nominee, and I'm assuming they'll hold my values and um, yeah, but so it's interesting because I talk a lot about on this show about the fact that Trump lost Maine by 7%, right? And I think that's really interesting. And I think the best hope for a conservative would be a split Democrat Party, would be a situation in which Golden runs as an independent. He would be doing us a favor, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's going to run as a Democrat, and I think he will win the Democrat nomination. And part of the reason I was thinking about this is that there's a high probability that a lot of your independents or your unenrolled voters who aren't enrolled in a party, they can vote in primaries, and there's a good
Mhm.
chance that they're going to vote in the primary for Jared Golden. So I think there's a really good chance that he's a Democrat nominee, but he may be making a play at an independent seat as well.
Yeah,
It's hard to
it'll
tell
definitely
what's going
be
to happen.
interesting to watch for sure.
And given that he won CD2, I think he'd be a difficult candidate to beat. But I think that there is still hope here in Maine. What would you say as kind of a last thing to the people of Maine about why you think we can win in 2026?
Uh, so I do think that we can win, and I think that as I've been going around the state and talking with thousands and thousands of Mainers, people are getting sick of it, and
Yeah.
you have a huge number of people who just haven't been voting, and as things have gotten worse and worse, they're waking up, and the more conversations that we have, and you know, the more that they hear is going on, they're going to continue waking up. And I hate to say it this way, but the reality is that I truly don't believe, and Mills just put it, you know, through in her budget. uh, it's not going to get any better in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
And right. And
Yep.
with the liberals that are in charge in Augusta at this point, I truly believe that they are sealing their fate by making life terrible for the rest of us and not caring. And so I think the worst thing that could be done for us is all of a sudden they listen to the people and do what the people want.
Which they're
Right.
not doing.
But they're not going to do that. So
Yeah.
I believe with all my heart that if we, the people, wake up, get active, register voters, and have thousands of conversations around the state and wake people up, we can win it. The reality is that it's only going to get worse, and the worse it gets, people will demand change.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, and I don't think it would matter at that point who the Democratic. It would to a degree, but it would matter less who the nominee is on either side. The candidate matters, and I think you're a strong candidate, and you have the right values and you have the right heart. You're a humble guy, and I think that's something I really appreciate. And I think that having a good candidate and um, you know having this situation. Somebody was telling me that they think that there's a really good chance that what happened in America in 2024 will happen as a microcosm in Maine in 2026, because as the Democrats continue to make poor decisions that make it hard on the people of Maine, as you're saying, people are going to get more and more tired of it. You're going to have lower, theoretically lower voter turnout among the Democrats, though they tend to be really high turnout, and high turnout from other people who are frustrated, and more people who wake up and decide that they don't want to be there. So there is hope. We can win in 2026, and we can also take back the House. We might even be able to, we can take the Senate. Like, we can do this because we're on the right side of history whether it comes to economics, whether it comes to the stuff that's going on in the schools, the transgender stuff, the boys and women's sports. These are all issues where in the long run, we're going to win on these issues because we are right. And the people are going to continue to wake up to these types of things, and we're going to win. So have confidence. Let's
So
win this thing.
there's one caveat I want to throw out there.
Sure.
Wholeheartedly agree with you, right? But we're only going to win if regular, everyday Mainers get involved, get active. What has happened over the last, we'll just say 10 years, right, is people have been feeling like they're just locked in the closet. They've been feeling like they can't say something. Get out, have conversations with your neighbors, have conversations with your friends, your coworkers, talk about it, and wake people up. It's not going to happen if Robert's the only one running around and Chuck's the only one running around and knocking on doors, right? Like, we need everyday Mainers while they're going through life having conversations and being willing to uh, have those conversations about the crazy things, right? And talk about what the education looks like in Maine. Talk about taxes. Talk about the cost of living. Talk about men and girls sports. Whatever those are. But we need people to wake up, and we need everyday Mainers to get out there. I guess
100%.
making the assumption we're closing, but
Yeah.
uh, uh, I was having a conversation during COVID with somebody that was uh, not terribly close, but we're having a good conversation. We're grilling out, and uh, I was talking about all of the craziness. Ooh, oh, are we there?
Yeah, you're still here.
Okay. I was talking about all the craziness and the way Janet Mills was handling COVID, and all the stuff that was going on, and I was just voicing my opinion, just saying, here, laying it out there. Didn't really know where he landed, and he just looks at me, and with all sincerity, he's like, "I'm not alone," and I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, like, again, to think you're alone in some of these thoughts and views and perspectives, and that is an overwhelming feeling that we've been having lately, and it's changing. I feel like we've hit bottom and we're going up, um, but people need to be willing to have those conversations and spark those aha moments, where people are willing to go out there and talk.
Yeah, we need to be bold and continue to speak. I think one of the things we talk about a lot on this podcast, if you guys have been listening, is the need to have civil discourse in our country, and it has to start with us. The Democrats are not going to come to the table. We have to be the ones to engage, build relationships, talk, have the difficult conversations, do it with respect, and not try to like treat people poorly and get mad. I get it. The Democrats are a little bit crazy. Their party is a little bit like a cult at this point, where if you don't completely agree with everything, they tell you to cut people out of your life, and that's obviously crazy. But we're not going to win back the state, as you said. We're not going to win back our country in the long run. Right now we're in power by slim margins. Obviously, the Electoral College we won by a lot, but when you look at the actual, like we barely control the House nationally, we barely control the Senate. We don't have a stranglehold on power at this point, and we're not going to have it if we don't continue to work. Everybody, kind of all hands on deck, and that goes back to the special election that you were talking about. This is actually a really, really big deal. We need you to get up there, help, give money if you can. Robert, how can people, if people want to support you, if they want to help? I know that right now you're going to say go on February 22nd and help out. Is it Carolyn Fish? Is that the
Fish.
name?
Yeah.
Fish, Carolyn Fish, who's running in the special election up in Bangor Brewer and some other town, Old Town. Is that the third town that represents? I think.
I feel like Orono is one of them as well.
Okay,
VZ,
could be.
parts
Okay.
of all of those. Yep.
Yep. So go up and help there. But how, if people want to know more about what you're doing, follow you on X, obviously. But what else? How can they help? How can they support?
Yeah, thank you. So yes, follow me on X. Again, you'll see all kinds of posts and learn more about my perspectives and views on there, as well as Facebook. I have a Facebook page, Wessels for Governor, for both of those, and they can go to my website, voterobertwessels.com. Ultimately, I'm at this stage of my campaign where I'm creating a team. I'm creating a statewide team. So if you want to be involved in that, definitely there's a volunteer tab right on my website. And if you want to, I'm going to sound like a real politician here. I need your money. The reality is that this stuff does take money, right? And I promise you, I'll be as frugal as I can. I will be as efficient with it. I will create that budget and do it really well. But I do need donations, and there's a donation tab as well on my website. So voterobertwessels.com. You can learn more. You can follow me on social media. I would absolutely love it. It's not about me, and it's about the people in Maine, and just need every day. I'm like, okay, one more person, right? And just getting regular everyday Mainers to be on board and to make a difference in our state.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being on. Thank you for going longer than expected. I did not also expect it to go quite this long, but we just kept going, having good conversation. I was like, but there's still more things I want to get to. So I appreciate you being flexible with me. And thank you all for watching. Again, be sure to like, share, subscribe. Again, one of the things I try to communicate with people here on X is that not everybody uses X. I know that there's like a really cool X community here now, Pine Tree Patriots. But there's a lot of other people that we know that just don't even use X. And so the best way to reach them is figure out what they use and then share this content with them. Again, I do create this content for free. Actually, it's not free. It costs me money. But I do it because I want to help. And if you guys can help by sharing, getting that out, that would be great. Thank you again, and we will see you. I think next week. The first is going to be the first podcast, not on Monday, but we'll have one. I think Wednesday or no Tuesday. We get a special one on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. It'll be a busy week, and we'll see you then. Thanks.